Sometime in March 2026, Princess Eugenie's profile disappeared from the website of Anti-Slavery International. No farewell statement, no formal announcement from the charity she had patroned for 7 years, an organization whose website had previously credited her work across the board with leaders in the field. Her name was just gone. Around the same time, multiple outlets reported that Eugenie and her sister Princess Beatrice had been told they wouldn't be attending Royal Ascot, 5 days of racing and careful royal choreography at which both sisters had regularly appeared. The Daily Mail described them as blindsided. People magazine reported the exclusion was linked to concerns about their parents' connections to Jeffrey Epstein. No official palace denial followed. 2 women, Her Royal Highnesses both, granddaughters of Queen Elizabeth II, never charged with anything, never accused of anything, removed from the guest list at a horse race. This is where the story starts. Not in 1988 when Beatrice was born, or 1990 when Eugenie arrived, and not with any mistake either of them made. We begin here, with the result. Because when you understand where Beatrice and Eugenie have ended up, the story of how they got there stops being royal gossip and becomes something considerably more uncomfortable. It becomes a structural argument about what the British monarchy decided to do with 2 women who were, from the very beginning, carrying other people's weight. Everyone has a take on Beatrice and Eugenie. Too flashy, too irrelevant, too expensive, too nothing. The question nobody has been asking is whether they ever had a real choice. Start with what they were born into. King George V issued letters patent on December 11, 1917, establishing the formal framework for royal titles in the British monarchy. The rules were hierarchical and specific. Children of the sovereign receive HRH status and the title of prince or princess. Children of the sons of the sovereign receive the same. That's where the automatic entitlement ends. Princess Beatrice was born August 8, 1988, as the daughter of Prince Andrew, the second son of Queen Elizabeth II. Her HRH title was automatic under that 1917 document. Princess Eugenie, born March 23, 1990, same parentage, same document, same result. Her Royal Highness from the moment she was born. What George V's letters patent didn't include was the part that matters for everything that follows. Debrett's, the authoritative reference on British titles and peerage, makes the distinction explicit. The letters patent confers only titular dignity and style, not institutional status or funding entitlements. An HRH title isn't a salary. It's not a security detail. It's not a palace communications operation or a press office or a defined public brief. It's a form of address, and in practical material terms, that is largely where the formal entitlements stop. Prince Michael of Kent holds an HRH designation and receives nothing from the sovereign grant, the primary mechanism through which British taxpayers fund the working royal family. Princess Anne's children, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, were offered HRH titles at birth, and Anne declined them on their behalf. As royal observers have noted in the years since, that decision probably simplified their lives considerably, because the HRH title without institutional backing is a specific kind of trap. It makes you famous without making you protected. The world watches. The palace's obligations toward you stay minimal. Beatrice and Eugenie were sitting exactly in that trap, titled enough to generate global press attention, not positioned to manage what that attention produces. The sovereign had the power to change that formula. We know this because Elizabeth II did change it, once, just not for the York girls. On December 31, 2012, the Queen issued new letters patent, specifically extending HRH and Prince or Princess titles to all children of the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. not just the eldest son. That amendment was targeted and deliberate, prompted by the new absolute primogeniture succession legislation. The sovereign's discretion was clearly available. The instrument was demonstrably flexible. It had been applied to extend protections to one set of grandchildren. No equivalent amendment was ever issued for Beatrice or Eugenie. That isn't a passive oversight. The palace machinery does not produce royal letters patent accidentally. The decision to extend the 2012 amendment to the Cambridge children and not to the York daughters was a choice, made by a functional institution with full awareness of both families. And the architecture it preserved, HRH title, Zero Institutional Support, is the foundation on which everything that followed was built. Before Beatrice and Eugenie had any meaningful say in their own public identities, their mother was building one for them. Sarah Ferguson married Prince Andrew in July 1986. The early years of the marriage were genuinely popular. She was seen as spirited and unroyal in a way that felt refreshing, a counterweight to the more careful Windsor public persona. By March 1992, Andrew and Sarah had formally announced their separation. Beatrice was 3 years old. Eugenie was 2. The palace's institutional response to that separation established a template. Buckingham Palace issued a statement confirming that Ferguson would no longer undertake public engagements on behalf of the Queen. The Queen also confirmed she wouldn't assume responsibility for Ferguson's debts. That second detail, quiet, almost administrative in how it was framed, was actually a significant act of institutional withdrawal. It created a celebrity ex-wife, still carrying the Duchess of York title, still visible at royal events, still living on the edges of the Windsor world, but financially unsupported, publicly conspicuous, and lacking any formal institutional framework that might have given structure to whatever came next. 5 months after the separation, in August 1992, the Daily Mirror published photographs taken in Saint-Tropez. They showed John Bryan, a Texan millionaire who was described as Ferguson's financial advisor, kissing her toes while she sunbathed topless on a private holiday. A second set of photographs showed Bryan lying on top of her on a chaise lounge. The images ran across tabloid front pages across the Western world. Prince Philip's relationship with Ferguson turned sharply cold. Paris Match, which reprinted the photographs, was later ordered to pay £84,000 in damages for doing so. Beatrice was 3 years and 11 months old when those photographs were published. Eugenie was 2 years and 5 months. What those photographs did, beyond the immediate embarrassment, was establish the Yorks as the royal family's chaos division. The institution's instinct, then and in every subsequent crisis, was to create distance. This isn't us. This is them. The effect on Ferguson's material situation was freefall. The Queen had already paid her debts on several occasions, in 6-figure cash sums, according to royal biographer Andrew Lowney. The palace had essentially been quietly absorbing the financial consequences of the divorce settlement, while Ferguson's circumstances kept worsening. That arrangement had its limits. Throughout the late 1990s and 2000s, Ferguson's financial difficulties continued and compounded. She published a memoir in 1996, My Story, in direct violation of the royal family's foundational PR principle of never complaining, never explaining. She sold photographs of Beatrice to Hello magazine for £250,000. Each of these decisions generated press coverage. Each increased the institutional distance between the Yorks and the core family, and none of them had anything to do with what Beatrice and Eugenie had done or chosen. By October 2009, the situation had reached a specific kind of desperation. Ferguson emailed Jeffrey Epstein requesting £20,000 for an urgent rent payment, explaining that her landlord had threatened to go to the newspapers if she didn't pay. In June 2009, while Epstein was incarcerated, she had also contacted him asking for business advice to help launch a venture she was calling Mother's Army. Epstein ultimately provided approximately £15,000 to help cover her debts. Ferguson later described her own financial situation in her memoir, Finding Sarah, as the trail of debts and chaos that I have left. In May 2010, that trail produced its defining moment. News of the World dispatched its undercover journalist Mazhar Mahmood, known in tabloid circles as the fake sheikh, to approach Ferguson posing as a wealthy businessman. She was filmed in a London apartment asking for £500,000 by wire transfer, plus an immediate £40,000 in cash as a down payment, in exchange for access to Prince Andrew. The tape captured her saying, £500,000 when you can, to me, open doors. The tape captured her saying, I can open any door you want. Look after me, and he'll look after you. You'll get it back tenfold. She accepted the cash. The footage was broadcast. Buckingham Palace issued a statement the same day. The Duke of York wasn't aware or involved in any of the discussions that occurred. Ferguson called it a serious lapse in judgment, driven by financial pressure, and that explanation carries some truth. The woman had been financially stranded by an institution that withdrew its support and then watched her spiral for 18 years. That context is real, but it does not change what was on the tape, and it does not change what the tape did to her daughters. Beatrice was 21 years old in May 2010. Eugenie was 20. They were adults, with no palace press office, no communications support, and no institutional mechanism for separating their public identity from their mother's conduct. The York name absorbed the impact, and the palace stood visibly apart. In 2011, the palace made its position regarding Beatrice and Eugenie concrete for the first time in a formal, operational sense. Both sisters lost their taxpayer-funded, round-the-clock police protection. The combined annual cost of that protection was cited at £500,000. The Telegraph had already reported in 2010 that guarding Eugenie alone during her first year at Newcastle University cost approximately £250,000, with the figure including costs from gap year travel to India, Thailand, and the United States. Following the removal, if the sisters wanted personal security, they would fund it themselves. This was a full 8 years before the Newsnight interview. It was years before Virginia Giuffre filed her civil lawsuit, before Andrew was stripped of his military titles, before the Epstein connection became the defining fact of the York family's public standing. The palace's formal distancing from Beatrice and Eugenie wasn't a reaction to those events. The distancing was already underway. The 2011 security removal drew a line in the sand. Here is where the institution's protection ends, and that line fell on the York side, before anyone outside a small circle had any reason to expect what was coming next. Multiple royal correspondents and commentators have reported that then Prince Charles was involved in the decision to remove the sisters' protection, with his intervention reportedly leaving Andrew very angry. Those accounts come consistently from royal experts rather than official palace documentation, so the precise mechanism of Charles's role remains contested. What isn't contested is what actually happened. The protection was removed, the institutional signal it sent was unmistakable, and Andrew's reported fury at the decision went nowhere because Andrew had been lobbying hard to have his daughters formally designated as working royals. The book Charles, the Heart of a King documents him lobbying for his daughters Beatrice and Eugenie to be admitted to working royal status. A formal designation would have given them defined official duties, institutional infrastructure, the press office, the security apparatus, the public function that transforms an HRH title from a liability into a vocation. Andrew wanted that for them. He pushed for it. The answer was no. That failed lobbying effort deserves more attention than it usually gets, because it punctures the comfortable narrative that Beatrice and Eugenie simply chose private careers over royal service, that the path was available, and they took a different one. Their own father, with every motive and presumably some institutional leverage, pushed for that path on their behalf and couldn't get it opened. The choice was made for them. The institution declined to create the role. April 29, 2011, Westminster Abbey. The wedding of Prince William and Catherine Middleton. Beatrice was 22 years old. She wore a Philip Tracy fascinator featuring an elaborate looping structure that rose from the crown of her head. Within hours of the wedding, the hat was a global internet meme. By the following morning, it had its own Facebook page. Academic research published years later described it as the most popular meme to arise from the 2011 royal wedding. A separate academic analysis noted that the mockery even drew on a tradition of the sisters' bad taste, mocking the hats and dresses of the sisters Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice. There is a specific and illustrative cruelty to this moment. Working royals, members of the core family, have palace communications staff, established relationships with designers, image consultants, and the institutional infrastructure to manage exactly this kind of public exposure. Beatrice had none of that. She was a 22-year-old attending her cousin's wedding as an unaffiliated guest who happened to hold an HRH title. The global mockery that followed was unchecked by any institutional response, unmanaged by any communications apparatus, and entirely disproportionate to the actual offense of wearing an unusual hat. But it illustrated, precisely and concretely, what the York sisters' lives had become by their early 20s. Too famous to move through the world without being watched, not institutionally supported enough to manage what being watched produced. The gap between those two realities isn't incidental. It's the specific condition the letter's patent framework created and the palace's decisions had preserved. Prince Andrew had known Jeffrey Epstein for years, an association formed through Ghislaine Maxwell that was long-standing and well-documented. By August 2019, Epstein was dead, having died in a Manhattan federal detention center. The full scope of his crimes was becoming the subject of major international reporting, congressional hearings, and enormous public attention. Andrew's name was in the documentation. The interview that followed was, by any sober assessment, one of the most comprehensively self-destructive acts of public communication in the history of the British monarchy. On November 16, 2019, Andrew sat down with BBC Newsnight anchor Emily Maitlis. The stated purpose was to address the allegations surrounding his relationship with Epstein and, specifically, Virginia Giuffre's claim that she had been trafficked to have sex with him in 2001. Andrew denied everything. The denials were the least memorable part of the interview, because the interview produced something more immediately damaging than a denial. It produced Andrew's alibi. I was with the children and I'd taken Beatrice to a Pizza Express in Woking for a party at, I suppose, sort of 4 or 5 in the afternoon. He used his daughter as his alibi. In a televised interview about his relationship with a convicted sex trafficker, watched by millions of people across the world, Andrew introduced Beatrice's name into the official public record of the scandal. She wasn't in the room. There is no evidence she was consulted before the interview. She became, in real time and without any agency in the matter, a named figure in one of the most widely covered news events of the decade. Andrew told Maitlis he remembered that specific Pizza Express visit so clearly because going to Woking at all was a very unusual thing for me to do. He also told her he couldn't have been the person Virginia Giuffre remembered sweating on a dance floor in London, because he had developed a medical condition following the Falklands War that temporarily prevented him from sweating. Both explanations were treated with open skepticism by the interviewing journalist and immediate public ridicule by almost everyone else. Both. Charles III, New King, New Court, and The Making of a King, separate royal histories independently researched, describe what followed as Andrew's disastrous 2019 BBC interview. It was the correct word. On November 20th, 2019, 4 days after the broadcast, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Andrew would step back from royal duties for the foreseeable future. Now set that against what it meant for Beatrice and Eugenie. Neither sister had any institutional communications infrastructure through which to respond. No palace press office issued a statement on their behalf, separating their reputations from their father's choices, acknowledging that they had nothing to do with the events being discussed. No official channel framed their position or defended their independence. They existed, as they always had, in the institutional gap. Sufficiently public to absorb the shrapnel from the explosion, insufficiently connected to the institution to receive any of its cover. The sisters were described in the aftermath as reportedly broken by the scandal surrounding their parents. Their father had named one of them in his Epstein defense on live television. Their mother had emailed Epstein asking for money while he was in prison. The York name, which was also their name, the designation under which both sisters held their HRH titles, was now attached to the most damaging scandal to hit the British monarchy in decades. And the two women most immediately carrying that name in the public eye had no formal voice, no institutional advocate, and no mechanism for publicly separating their identity from any of it. In January 2022, the formal institutional reckoning arrived. On January 12th, a U.S. federal judge rejected Andrew's attempt to have Virginia Giuffre's civil lawsuit against him dismissed. The following day, January 13th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II stripped Andrew of his military affiliations, all royal patronages, and the use of HRH in any official or professional capacity. Reuters reported it precisely. The royal family removed Prince Andrew's military links and royal patronages on Thursday and said he will no longer be known as His Royal Highness in any official capacity. He retained the personal dignity of the title, but its public-facing designation was formally gone. The BBC headline was 4 words: Prince Andrew loses military titles and use of HRH. In February 2022, Andrew settled Giuffre's civil lawsuit for an undisclosed sum. He agreed to donate to her victims' rights charity. He denied all allegations. The settlement wasn't an admission of liability. His daughters had nothing to do with any of this. They weren't named in the lawsuit. Neither was accused of wrongdoing. But the York name, the specific designation under which Beatrice held her title as Princess Beatrice of York and Eugenie held hers as Princess Eugenie of York, was now formally and publicly attached to a man whose mother had stripped him of his honors, 9 days before he paid an undisclosed sum to settle a case brought by a trafficking survivor. The palace had drawn its clearest line. Andrew was on the wrong side of it. His daughters were named after him. When Queen Elizabeth II died on September 8, 2022, and Charles became king, the slimmed-down monarchy stopped being a private preference and became operational policy. The concept wasn't new. Charles had articulated a vision for a smaller, more tightly focused working royal family for years, concentrated around the monarch and the immediate line of succession, less expensive, more sustainable, more clearly purposeful. The New Royals describes it as one of the hallmarks of Charles's reign. In an interview quoted in The Making of a King, Charles noted that the slimmed-down framing dated from a time when there were a few more people to make that case, for the broader model. In practice, it meant the circle contracted. The royals who appear on the Buckingham Palace balcony at Trooping the Colour, who ride in the carriage processions at Royal Ascot, who carry official working briefs in the name of the Crown, that group shrank. A Spectator article described what the Trooping balcony looked like under Charles plainly. A handful of royals appeared on the balcony after the service, the so-called working royals. So there it was, the slimmed-down monarchy just as the king wanted it. The working royals on that balcony were the King and Queen, the Prince and Princess of Wales, and a small number of senior family members with defined and funded roles. Beatrice and Eugenie weren't among them. They had never been formally designated as working royals, and under Charles's operational framework, there was never going to be a pathway to that designation for them. The dual nature of this policy, genuine modernization and convenient exclusion, simultaneously, is where the argument gets genuinely complicated, and it's worth being precise about it. The slimmed-down monarchy is a real policy with real precedents and real fiscal logic. The idea that every HRH holder should receive public funding and a taxpayer-funded security detail isn't a serious position. Other monarchies have managed exactly this kind of contraction. The argument for a leaner working institution has legitimate foundations that predate Charles's accession and predate the York scandal by decades. But the timing and application of the policy in this specific case are worth examining without pretending they're coincidental. Charles became king in September 2022. By that point, the York brand was maximally and publicly toxic. Andrew had been stripped of his honors by his own mother. Ferguson had paid for access on camera and emailed Epstein for rent money. Both were documented as having financial and personal connections to a convicted sex trafficker whose name had become globally synonymous with the abuse of young women. The slimmed-down monarchy, as a policy that structurally excluded Beatrice and Eugenie from official royal life, solved a problem that had no other clean institutional answer. You couldn't formally punish the sisters for their parents' conduct. They had done nothing wrong. You couldn't publicly strip them of titles they'd done nothing to forfeit, without generating exactly the kind of sympathy narrative the palace wanted to avoid. But you could define working royal in a way that simply didn't include them, root that definition in a coherent modernization principle, and present the outcome as policy rather than punishment. The evidence does not support the claim that Charles designed the slimmed-down monarchy as a weapon specifically targeted at the Yorks. That would overstate what can be documented. What the evidence does support is that the policy produced a structurally convenient effect. It gave the palace a principle-based justification for excluding the sisters from the core institution, without ever having to say publicly that the York Association was the reason. The mechanism was modernization. The outcome was isolation. From the perspective of two women who had never done anything that warranted either, the distinction between a targeted purge and a convenient policy may feel immaterial. Strip out the gossip and look at the concrete reality. Beatrice and Eugenie hold HRH titles, and that remains true. They receive nothing from the sovereign grant. Eugenie herself confirmed this directly, describing herself as someone who has a job, doesn't take money from the sovereign grant, leads mostly a private life. Beatrice built a career in tech and finance. Eugenie worked at Hauser and Wirth Gallery and built genuine advocacy work around anti-trafficking causes. Those careers are real, but they weren't made by free choice in any uncomplicated sense. They were made because the institution had not created a formal role, had not provided institutional support, and had actively removed the security infrastructure that would have been required for either sister to perform public-facing official duties safely. They have no palace press office, When their father went on Newsnight and named Beatrice as his Pizza Express alibi on live television, no palace communications team was managing the fallout on her behalf. When the internet spent weeks mocking her hat, no institutional media advisor was responding. When tabloids reported the Ascot exclusion and described the sisters as blindsided, neither had any formal channel through which to respond or any institutional voice to push back. The cost of that absence is harder to quantify than a budget line, but no less real in its effects. Working royals, even those the institution eventually pushes out, had access to palace communications infrastructure, legal support, and institutional representation before they lost it. Beatrice and Eugenie never had it in any operational sense. They navigated the specific challenge of being globally famous without institutional cover for their entire adult lives. Eugenie stepped down from Anti-Slavery International in March 2026, after 7 years, one of the few remaining institutional adjacent positions she held, and it's gone. Reports have described her as having cut off contact with her father following the latest Epstein revelations. Beatrice has largely withdrawn from public view. 7 charities have severed ties with their mother. Their father was under police investigation. And the most recent chapter in their public story is a reported exclusion from a horse race. None of it was for anything they did. The honest accounting of what happened to Beatrice and Eugenie isn't a conspiracy. It's something almost more frustrating than that. It's a series of institutional choices, parental catastrophes, and structural decisions that each made sense individually and that accumulated, one on top of the next, into an outcome that had been functionally inevitable for years before it arrived. They were born into a tidal framework that conferred visibility without guaranteeing any of the protection that visibility required. Their mother's financial desperation, produced in part by an institution that withdrew its support while leaving her publicly exposed, generated a cascade of scandals that the daughters absorbed without agency or recourse. Their father lobbied hard for a working royal designation that would have given them institutional footing, and the lobby was rejected. Their taxpayer-funded security was removed in 2011, 8 years before the Newsnight interview, a full decade before Andrew's formal disgrace, establishing in concrete operational terms that the palace considered them peripheral. Their father then conducted one of the most comprehensively damaging public appearances in modern royal history, naming one of them in his defense on live television without apparent coordination or consent. The institution subsequently stripped their father of his honors, settled his lawsuit, and implemented a modernization policy that had no room for them anywhere in its architecture. At every juncture, they were passengers. At no juncture did the institution extend any of the tools it had available: a letters patent amendment, a formal working designation, a communications infrastructure, an official statement of separation from their parents' conduct that would have given them a fighting chance at something other than this. The 2012 Letters Patent Amendment exists as a proof of concept. The sovereign had the power and the precedent to extend protections to specific family members. That power was used for the Cambridge children. It wasn't used for the York sisters. That isn't a legal inevitability. It's a choice. The question that the palace has never been asked to answer, because nobody in any official capacity has been held to account for answering it, is the simplest one. If the institution had genuinely been on Beatrice and Eugenie's side, what would that have looked like? An amendment, a designation, a formal acknowledgement that 2 women who had never done anything wrong were being swept into institutional freefall through no fault of their own, and that the Crown had both the tools and the responsibility to prevent it. We never saw any of that. What we saw instead was a removed security detail, a rejected lobbying effort, an absent press office, a policy that tidied them out of the frame, and a reported exclusion from a horse race. The real story of Beatrice and Eugenie isn't what they failed to become. It's what was decided for them, through policy, through omission, through the slow and careful management of institutional association, before they were old enough to walk into any room and make the argument for themselves. They were never going to survive this. The machinery that guaranteed that outcome was already running long before either of them had any say in it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one.